this evening is not about me or about the Ambassadors Club at all. It's about Ambassador Don McKay. But before, and it is indeed a great honor for us to welcome him and Mrs. McKay to Fairleigh Dickinson University. But before I introduce him, I would like to tell you that the Ambassadors Club has been a successful venture. And one of the reasons for its being as successful as it is Ambassador Don McKay, who is a member, who is a director of the club. And it is because of commitment of ambassadors like him, and him in particular, that the Ambassadors Club has achieved the type of success and renown that it has managed in the very short period of its existence. But back to Ambassador Don McKay. You have this flyer with you, and it gives you everything that comes from the official CV of the ambassador. And there's little that I can add to it except perhaps to underline for the audience the importance of the Rainbow Warrior case, which I hope Ambassador McKay will elaborate a bit for us tonight, and of which he was one of the lead actors. This was a fabulous case. It had all the makings of a Hollywood thriller. It had commitment, it had nuclear non-proliferation, it had intrigue, it had conspiracy involving a superpower, or at least a permanent member of the Security Council. It had secret agents caught with their hands in the till. It had retribution, and that retribution, which was visited on the criminal of the case, was due in no mean measure to the contribution of an eminent lawyer and son of New Zealand, who is Ambassador Don McKay. So he's a hero to all and sundry, all those who believe in justice, who believe in fairness, who believe in environmental concerns, who believe in a green world, who believe in nuclear non-proliferation, who believe in justice. All this is incarnated in the person of our distinguished speaker of this evening. And then perhaps his greatest achievement is to have discovered his wife, Maria McKay. Mrs. McKay is of Italian origin, and you know that Italy is the source of, it's the Renaissance, it is the source of Western civilization. If we are what we are today in the West, it is really because of Italy. And so she incarnates in her person that fountainhead of wisdom, which is Western civilization and Italy's role in it, as a teacher, as an avid reader, as a person who's deeply interested in music, and a person who has supported and built the greatness of her husband, the Ambassador of New Zealand. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker of this evening, Ambassador Don McKay, Permanent Representative of New Zealand, Director of the Ambassadors Club, hero of the Rainbow Warrior case, and husband of Maria McKay.
Well, there's one thing that I'd agree with in all of that, and that is Ambassador Kamal's comments about my wife. But apart from that, you shouldn't believe a word of it. I often think that if I was actually going before a court, the person who I would most want as my advocate is Ambassador Kamal, and tonight he's excelled himself. I thank him very much for those very kind words. I certainly shan't live up to the expectations that he has unfortunately created, but I will do my best in a very small and modest way. As you will see, the subject that I've been given to talk about tonight is nuclear proliferation and international law. And what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about New Zealand's experience, and indeed the experience of the region of the world that I come from, the South Pacific, with nuclear proliferation, and indeed the way in which we used international law to try and stop nuclear proliferation in our part of the world. I'd then like to talk a little bit about the current state of international law in the world, because I think that unfortunately we're going through a phase where the international law that we relied on very much when we fought nuclear testing in our part of the world, that international law, and indeed international law more generally, I think is under a certain amount of threat at the moment. I think that's hugely unfortunate, and you may or may not agree with some of the comments that I make in that respect, and I would invite you to be extremely provocative in any questions that you want to raise as a result of that. Now, I come from a very small country. It's 4 million people, and it's down by this rather large country, Australia. I don't know if we have anyone here from Australia tonight. We're unlikely to have anyone from New Zealand, but there is no one here from Australia. But in any event, if you look at this map, you'll see that New Zealand and Australia have a large area of ocean up to our north and also to our east. And in our case, that part of that ocean has been used or was used for many years as the site of nuclear testing, which was conducted in our region by France. And most of what I'm going to say is going to focus on disputes which New Zealand had with France over that nuclear testing, which was obviously designed to further develop the French nuclear arsenal, but in that way also contributed to the competition in the arms race and the development of nuclear arsenals and nuclear proliferation more generally. Now, the South Pacific, as I've said, has been used for nuclear testing by France over more recent time, but in fact it has a very long history of nuclear testing, going back to shortly after the Second World War. Initially, the United States conducted nuclear tests in the region in the Marshall Islands, which was part of the Pacific that the United States had jurisdiction over. The United Kingdom conducted nuclear tests in Australia, in fact, with the acquiescence of the Australian government. And of course, all of those tests that were conducted at that time were conducted against a background of not a great deal of knowledge about the impact of nuclear tests on the environment and indeed on individuals. A number of you may have seen film shots that show, for example, that the nuclear states, when they were testing their weapons, actually exposed their service people to the nuclear blast to see what the impact of nuclear tests would be on individuals. As I say, the level of knowledge in those early days after the Second World War, after the explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was very, very limited. France, as one of the world's nuclear powers, had begun testing in North Africa, in the Saharan area, but when Algeria became independent, France needed to look for somewhere else to go. Now, in the Sahara, France had conducted its tests underground. But when it looked around to those parts of the world where it continued to have jurisdiction and which it regarded as suitable for nuclear testing, it lit upon our part of the world because, as you'll see from the map, there are a lot of very small islands up here. There's a lot of ocean, and France had territory across here in French Polynesia, which is to the northeast of New Zealand. It's also very close to the Cook Islands and Niue, which are territories in respect of which New Zealand had various international responsibilities at the time. For engineering and cost reasons, France decided that it would conduct its tests in the atmosphere. So what we had was a situation where a couple of thousand kilometres up to the northwest of New Zealand and rather closer to a number of Pacific islands, including islands for which we had responsibility, there was nuclear test being conducted atmospherically.